Okay, seeing none, we're going to go ahead and move on to a hearing on House Bill 2591. The title of the bill is repealing the State General Fund and Conservation Fee Fund transfer to the Abandoned Oil and Gas Well Fund. As you'll recall, last year we passed House Bill 2022, but there was some conflict in some language, and this is just a technical bill to clean up that language, and so I'll turn it over to Jesse Pringle from the Office of the Revisor of Statutes to describe the information on House Bill 2591. Jesse?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, committee. I am Jesse from the Revisor of Statutes office. I have been second chair to Jill this session, so I'm excited to finally say hello to the committee as a whole. So this morning, the hearing is on House Bill 2591, and as the chairman stated, this is a short bill. It only repeals KSA 55-193. That statute directs quarterly transfers of $100,000 from the state general fund and then $200,000 from the conservation fee fund to the abandoned oil and gas well fund. And so that statute had prohibited the state general fund transfers of the $100,000 since 2004. So what occurred last session was that we had House Bill 2022 and then the mega bill. So in House Bill 2022, the legislature repealed 55-193. And then in the mega bill, the legislature continued that prohibition of the state general fund transfers of $100,000 to extend to fiscal year 21, 22, and 23. And so as the chairman stated, since there are these two different concurrent changes in the statute, what happened was it created a conflict. And so our office has published both versions of that statute, but what is being presented today is a repeal similar to what was in House Bill 2022. And I'm happy to answer any questions the committee has on that.
So it's the repeal of the language in 2022 and not in 2007?
Correct.
Okay. Committee, are there any questions for Jesse? And again, I just want to say this is just cleanup language, so we can combine the two well funds, so we can address the abandoned wells across the state of Kansas. Just happened to be a conflict in language between the bill that was passed last year and then what was customarily put into the budget bill last year. Any questions? All right, seeing none, thank you, Jesse. We'll go ahead and move on to testimony for House Bill 2591, and I do not have anybody who is wanting to testify as a proponent for House Bill 2591. So if there's anybody in the audience that would like to speak as a proponent for 2591, here's your chance. I recognize Ed Cross with Cuyahoga. Morning, Ed.
The bill that was passed last year, the bill that was passed last year that would just allow the repeal of 55-193 and the KCC, which, and Ryan may want to speak to, but they feel that that's the best way to address this permanently. And it's what the intent of the bill that was passed last year was, and so we're supportive of this bill.
All right, thank you, Ed. Are there any questions for Ed? All right, seeing none, thank you again for being here. Anybody else that wants to speak in favor of House Bill 2591? All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on. I am not showing any opponent testimony for 2591. As far as neutral testimony, I do have from the Kansas Sierra Club, Zach Pastoria. Zach?
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Zach Pastora, proud lobbyist for the Kansas Sierra Club. About 5,000 members across the state share the mission to advance enjoying, exploring, and protecting the great outdoors of Kansas. Great to be before you this year, and would be remiss if I didn't take 10 seconds to thank you for your public service and pushing on for the people of Kansas and the state's business, but also upholding law to protect the ecosystems and natural resources of the state. Appreciate it very much. As you can see, I'm neutral testimony. We leave it up to the wisdom of the body here to clean up the technical language of the law, but also manage the other fiscal responsibilities and obligations that you have. I want to just provide a few comments in my testimony. I got the little green tree in the upper right-hand corner. Hope you take a look at it. A few things, according to last week's memo from the Department of Interior, Kansas is estimated to potentially receive $58.6 million in Phase 1 of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act for abandoned well cleanup. They call it orphan well in the federal statute. Kansas has over 5,000 wells that require action still on the books, so much work needs to be done. It would be great if we could take all this money and apply it for those abandoned wells. I include in the bottom of my testimony that as is, if we were to plug all those abandoned wells across the state tomorrow, it is estimated per area that they need to be plugged that would cost nearly $22.8 million. Okay, so that's pretty significant, so we could use all the money we can get. I also point out in my testimony for the past decade or so, for every well we plug, there's about another well that we add to the books. Either we find out there in plugging wells, or companies go bankrupt and put the onus on the state to do their plugging. So, September 2011, we had 5,475, and we currently in 2022 stand at 5,477. So we're not making much progress, but I'm hoping this injection of federal money can help us do that. Of course, as you know, we testified in your committee in the past, these are good jobs that can be created in cleaning up and plugging these wells. But as I encourage you to talk with our conservation director, it's become apparent that it's a little bit tougher to find work out there, and as the industry increases as far as the price and the appeal of doing oil work across the state, we want to make sure that we can still provide those opportunities, provide jobs for those people to do the plugging for the state's behalf. Just a few more things. I put in there, maybe we should think about a sunset on the fees, and the reason that being, maybe that doesn't apply with the technical cleanup, but we ought to maintain the conservation fee fund. That's the state's portion that's provided by industry to clean up oil and gas matters that protect the environment across the state. So we encourage you to do that. I'll leave it up to you on the state general fund transfers. And then my final thing is, I've been up here 10 years trying to lobby to help the environment. It would be great in the next 10 years that we plug all these abandoned oil and gas wells. We plugged 1,000 of them last year, is my understanding. We have 5,000 on the books. Hopefully in 10 years' time we can get them all plugged, and it'd be great for Kansas. And a final thought, talking with my Sierra Club colleagues, it's one thing for us to clean up those legacy wells and plug them. And I've been around for, you would find that were maybe drilled 100 years ago or 50 years ago. But in the modern times, it's kind of disconcerting that modern companies put the onus on the rest of the industry or the state by declaring bankruptcy and getting away with, leaving the tab up to the taxpayers. So just as a kind of a taxpayer standpoint, it would be nice if we maybe increase the bonding amounts at the Kansas Corporation Commission, so it's at least we can keep those companies more on the hook for plugging those wells throughout time. So thank you very much. Appreciate your attention.
All right, thank you, Zach. And, as mentioned before, when it was described by the revisor's office as just a technical cleanup, in regards to House Bill 2022, which was combining the two funds that was pre-1996 and then post-1996 for the purpose of plugging those abandoned wells. Most of those wells across the state of Kansas, as you mentioned, about 5,400 of them are pre-1996, and actually they're very, very old wells that we need to plug across the state. And as you mentioned in your testimony, sometimes when we go in and plug the one well, we find out that there's 3 or 4 that we need to plug as well. So this is an environmental issue, and that's the reason why we had House Bill 2022, was to address that need to plug the abandoned oil and gas wells across the state of Kansas. Representative Carlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just curious, and if we you said we might get around roughly 60 million from the federal government, and we need like 22 million to do everything we know about right now. Do you know, or does anyone in this room know, if we use that money in that way and had a balance, can we put it in a reserve fund for that purpose? Or is it going to have to be spent for that and go back?
I'm happy to defer the others in the
Yeah,
room.
and that's my question, and somebody can find out for me, maybe research can let me know later, but we have this every year, and like you said, it's just like whack-a-mole. You put one down and two more come up, and so we know we're going to need funds for that in the future, so.
Yeah. Yep, I think that's an important point, and we can't tell how many wells we'll find down the road, and so I would be conservative and say it's best to have the ability to have more money than less for these things until we get them all plugged. We feel comfortable about that, but I will say, you know, I put in there that we're eligible for $58.6 million, but in recent discussion, that total might be a little bit harder to achieve for the state of Kansas. And so I'd defer to those experts that are working on trying to acquire that money within the KCC. But I don't know if that's a given, that 58.6 million for the first phase one. We should be able to achieve more money down the road, but just a few further thoughts. Appreciate it. And Chairman, I'm just on your comment there. I'd say I really appreciate the bill that was worked on in this committee 2022. We had 1,000 wells plugged. Last year was most we've had in several years. So thank you for passing that legislation. I hope we can keep those numbers going down.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
And I would say let's stay with the context of House Bill 2591, which is just a combination of the two funds so we can address the abandoned oil and gas wells across the state of Kansas. The federal money that may be coming into the state is a separate issue aside from House Bill 2591. This is just a technical cleanup so we can address the needs that we intended with House Bill 2022 last year. Representative Wolfmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your testimony, but really just a comment. Thank you for all the work you're doing on all these issues that are so important to Kansas. We really appreciate your leadership. Thank you.
Any further questions that we might have for Zach? All right, seeing none. Again, I'm not showing anybody that wants to testify in neutral or opponent testimony, so if you wish to do so, now is your chance. And if not, I'm going to close the hearing on House Bill 2591. Okay, committee, the next item that we have on the agenda is an update from the Housing Resources Corporation, and so I would invite to committee Ryan Vincent. Welcome to committee.
The mic on here? Can you hear me okay? All right.
Yes.
I do have a packet of information that I've hopefully have distributed to everybody on the committee, but I was going to, with your permission, Mr. Chair, I'll go ahead and share my screen here and we'll run through a presentation because sometimes a picture can be 1,000 words here. Give me just a moment. Is that up and running? Perfect. Well, good morning. My name is Ryan Vincent. I'm Executive Director at Kansas Housing Resources Corporation, the state's housing arm, and I'm honored today to talk about housing, and more importantly, to talk about homes and the value that they bring to our neighborhoods and our communities and our jobs and everything in between. Got a lot to cover, so I'm going to make sure I fly through these slides. Realizing that some of you may not be familiar with Kansas housing, the work that we do, the mission that we have, I'll give a 30,000-foot overview. I'm going to touch on our programs very lightly, but you've got fact sheets that are in your packet that talk about the programs we have to benefit your constituents. Then I'm going to talk about how housing has changed with COVID. I'm going to talk about our new statewide housing needs assessment that was released just last month and a couple of next steps. As far as who we are, Kansas Housing is a nonprofit public corporation. Years ago, we were part of the State Department of Commerce, but we split off and are now a public corporation that administers both community and housing programs. Our mission is simple. We help Kansans access the safe, affordable housing they need and the dignity they deserve. We work with everyone from property managers and owners to developers and bankers, from community leaders to legislators. If you live, breathe, do business in the state of Kansas, you're a stakeholder of Kansas housing. Our programs run the gamut, from funding emergency shelters and domestic violence centers. We provide rental assistance. We do actual housing development, which is what I'm going to primarily talk about today. We offer weatherization upgrades that are free to income qualifying Kansans. We've got a down payment assistance program. We regulate the installation of manufactured housing. And since COVID, we have been administering hundreds of millions of dollars in resources for emergency rental, utility, and internet assistance that I'll touch on very briefly. But let's talk about housing development, because if we're going to really talk about how to address the underlying housing problem in our state, it's all about developing new homes. We've had a crisis for many years, and it can be the tornado in Greensburg or Southeast Kansas flooding. It can be the housing market collapse, or it can be the pandemic of today. But we wouldn't have the crisis without the housing problem, and that's that we simply do not have enough units of safe, accessible, affordable housing in our state, in rural and urban areas alike. We do have a couple programs that are wonderful resources that I'm going to briefly touch on, and primarily just give you a couple examples, because I think that can mean a lot. We've got tax credits from the Department of Treasury that we get every year that we allocate that fund about $70 million in housing development in our state. We've got a moderate income housing program I will touch on. In 2021 alone, through our tax credit program, we were able to build 540 homes in your neighborhoods and your communities. This is the Lee Lofts property in downtown Salina, Kansas. And it's a wonderful example of how, through our programs, we can build homes for Kansans when we have Tony's Pizza and when we have other employers in the community, Kubota Tractor, that are expanding their operations. We're able to save a historic property where Lee Jeans started. There's still blue dye in the floor on this property. We're telling the story through the investments in homes that we're doing. Even better, we're able to help be part of the downtown revitalization in Salina, Kansas. This is Stony Brook Homes in Scott City and Norton and Hoxie, 15 beautiful units of housing, some of the first housing that these communities have seen in a long time, that will eventually be homeownership financed through our tax credit program. Here's Solana Village Townhomes in McPherson, beautiful housing for persons with disabilities. That's just a couple of examples of the types of products that we're able to do through these wonderful programs that never have enough resource but can do so much good. But we realize that there's a certain band of people that make too much to qualify for low-income housing programs. And these are our healthcare workers and our teachers. There are firefighters and our police officers. There's people in our communities that we need to prosper and to have a healthy economy and community. Through our moderate income housing program that's funded by you all at the state legislature, we're able to provide loans and grants to cities and counties in rural communities under 60,000 population. We're able to fund infrastructure and actual housing development. And what's great about the program is we're not telling communities what their housing needs are. They're telling us, and we're funding that development. It's $2 million a year, which equates to 69 cents per Kansan per year. We all know that's not enough to meet the needs of rural communities, let alone our state. But it's a start, and it's a successful start. Here's a map of the applications that we've received in the nearly 10 years the program's been running. And here's where we've been able to fund developments. And we're so proud of funding these developments where there's no developments and no new housing going in. Rural communities around the state, we're unlocking home. The beauty of this program, as I mentioned, is that we're able to serve households up to 150% of area median income. Our tax credit program can only fund up to 60%. Our home rental program can only fund up to 80%, and there's nothing that is funding housing in our state above 80% other than this $2 million MIH program. A couple examples of what we're doing. Dodge City, where you're all aware, is a massive new dairy operation coming in to play. We were able to fund 14 units of moderate income housing. And what's great about it is that we're working with Dodge City Community College students so that we're funding not just the housing of today, but the housers of tomorrow. Because if we don't have people that can swing a hammer, we're not going to have housing in the years to come. This is in Atchison, Kansas. It's the historic Ymca building that was just financed through MIH a couple years ago. Another great example of saving history, of being a part of downtown revitalization in Atchison, Kansas, of providing beautiful housing that hasn't been built in many of these communities in quite some time. This is Stafford County, where we were able to fund 4 moderate income housing units. Another great example of how we partnered with K-State School of Architecture students so that we're giving them practice on how to design homes so that they'll stay in our state and design more homes for our communities. Another great example, it's energy efficient. It's a wonderful way to test new developments. I know I'm flying through it, but let's talk about emergency response because that's been a big chunk of our last couple years, mine and yours. KHRC has administered everything from emergency solutions grant to community action agency funding through the pandemic. But we were able to launch and run in 6 weeks a Kansas eviction prevention program that got nearly $20 million out the door in fall of 2020. That was followed by a Kansas emergency rental assistance program that launched in March and is still going today, where we're able to provide rent and utility and internet assistance to households that are going to lose their home through eviction. And even more, well, not even more important, but just as importantly, through a time of eviction moratorium, we're able to make landlords whole. Landlords who haven't been able to receive rent because of that lengthy period of eviction moratorium, we've been able to catch them up so that everybody has a fresh start. We will be soon launching a Kansas Homeowner Assistance Fund program, which is the equivalent of KRA except for homeowners, people who are behind on their mortgages or their taxes or their utilities. Here's some benchmarks for KRA. To date, we have served almost 15,000 households in our state with nearly 40,000 people. You think about most of our mid-sized cities in this state, and they don't have populations. Nearly 40,000 Kansans were facing eviction, and through this program and our resources, we've kept them in their homes and we've made their landlords whole. We're proud of that, and it's through partnerships with great organizations and great people like you all who are helping us get the word out to your constituents that we have these resources. We have gotten almost $100 million out the door, and we've served over 5,000 Kansas small business landlords. So let's talk about our future. The last year we've spent traveling the state. We've had over 70 listening sessions. We met with community leaders. We met with employers, and we met with bankers and realtors and anybody that has an interest in housing. We developed through census data and through listening sessions some goals and some strategies to address not just the crisis that we are experiencing today, but the problem that we've been experiencing for decades in our state. We released the study. It's on our website. There's an executive summary. There's regional assessments. There's great data and interactive story map tools for you to use in your meetings with your constituents, for builders and property developers to use, for policymakers at the local level and at the state level. Some of the strategies that they've come up with are that we need to free up and develop new moderate income housing. We have best practices for local governments so that they have examples of what works in their communities and what resources we can leverage. We know that we need to preserve our older housing stock. 30% of our homes in this state were built before 1960. We have counties in our state that the median age of the housing is from the late 1930s. We've got to start investing in housing if we're going to have jobs, if we're going to have healthy communities, if we're going to have strong schools. We need diversity of housing. The single lot detached home is simply not the only model that our society needs as we age, as we have changing needs, as in our demographics. Finally, we need to address our building trades shortage, which leads me to next steps. And the first next step is at the state level. We're working hard at our office to use the data that we've gleaned. We're using hard to work with you all and with different policymakers on expanding existing programs that have proved successful, like our MIH program. We're working with the Department of Commerce, with USDA Rural Development on ideas for how to invest in housing programs using the programs that we have. And then we're also working with a number of other local communities on different ideas. But let me just give you a couple examples at the state level of what KHRC is doing. And let me use MIH as an example. Last 2 years, in 2021, we were only able to fund 9 out of 28 applications we received from cities and counties and rural communities. That's $2 million out of $8.7 million. In 2020, we were able to fund 7 out of 24. That's $2 million out of $7.7 million in requests. This program leverages $6 for every $1 in requests or in state investment that we make. That's a pretty good return on investment, and that's something that's an existing program. We have existing partners. We have a universe of applications that are ready to fund, but for having resources. Combined, we have 24 applications sitting on my desk at KHRC requesting $9 million that are ready to go. We estimate that with $20 million as proposed by the governor's budget and a couple of bills that are at the legislature right now, we could build approximately 590 moderate income housing units. That's just moderate income housing, which is so important. But I mentioned our tax credit program. A couple examples from that. In 2021, we ended up denying 12 pencil-ready developments due to lack of credits. 247 units of new construction, 205 units of rehab that are pencil ready to move forward with development, but were denied because we don't have the resource. We estimate that with $20 million in gap financing, we could fund 4 additional developments that have already been, again, pencil ready. 114 new construction units and 46 units of rehab. I've thrown a lot at you. My contact information is actually on the next screen. This one gives a nice chance to just sign up for our contact list. It's a great way to find out what resources we have and are launching so that you can keep your constituents informed. We always welcome and field your constituent concerns. Definitely encourage you to watch for Facebook and Twitter postings there, and just my contact information follows. But at this point, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to field any questions you and the committee may have.
All right. Thank you, Ryan, for being here and giving us an update. I know we just had a housing study that was done across the state of Kansas, and there are needs all across the state, whether that be rural or urban. We need to address some of those needs. So talking about the governor's budget, she has allocated $20 million in regards to moderate income housing. And I think you were showing in your presentation that you have about $10 million that could be utilized immediately. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. And of course, that's based on a universe of $2 million in funding each year that we get. So we anticipate that if we were to put out a request for a proposal with a much larger pot of money and potentially expanded uses, that we would get a much larger volume of applications.
And how many units would that produce across the state?
The $20 million we're anticipating to be about 590 units. So of course, depending on what funding level the legislature ultimately funds, that would determine the amount. We generally run about $20,000 to $25,000 per unit in subsidy, which just shows the gap that it takes, particularly in rural areas, to finance actual housing development.
And are those multifamily or single family?
That's the beauty of the program, Mr. Chairman, is that it's everything that a community wants. So if a community's needs are infrastructure so that they can support the actual residential dwellings, we're able to fund that. If it's acquisition and demo and rehab, we're able to fund that. If it's down payment assistance, we're able to fund that through the program. And that's the beauty of a state program. You know, we don't have the income restrictions and we don't have all of the, I guess, red tape, to put it mildly, that sometimes comes with federal programs. We're able to be immediately responsive, and some of that is because we are a public corporation. We're not a state agency. We don't have to run through a lot of the same processes that the formal state government has to run through. And it's not that we're not accountable. We certainly are audited regularly. We report to you all as policymakers, and our board is appointed by the governor. But we do have some of that flexibility and some of those tools that traditional state agencies don't offer. But the best part is that that statute, the Moderate Income Housing Program, which flows through our State Housing Trust Fund, is the most flexible statute for housing development our state currently offers. And I referenced the State Housing Trust Fund. There's a report in your packets on that fund. It's essentially an account. The KHRC administers as the trustee. We're able to provide loans and grants to cities and counties, to housing developers, to nonprofits. It's a truly flexible account. The challenge has been that there's been no funding for it since its inception. When we have had the little bits of funding that we have, it's been for emergencies, where it's been through KHRC's excess operations that have funded things like Habitat affiliates, gap financing for housing developments, supplemental weatherization dollars. As an example, we run a weatherization program that is a wonderful program, but if there's too much weatherization needed in the home, we have to defer it, which means we have to tell people that we can't offer the services. But if we're able to use a small amount of our money to finance the new roof, then we're able to leverage the federal money from the Department of Energy and the federal LEAP money to actually weatherize the home. So those homes are saving money month after month after month, in addition to the comfort and the safety and the energy efficiency that comes through those savings. So wonderful example how when we can use flexible state money, we're able to leverage available federal money to do the actual housing development to meet the state's needs.
Well, let's talk about the federal money that's come in regards to the pandemic with COVID-19. And particularly, I want to focus on the eviction program and then also the Kansas Homeowners Assistance Program. What are the safeguards that that money is actually used to pay the landlords for past rent, or to the banks that hold the mortgage so the banks are actually being paid?
We appreciate that question, Mr. Chairman, and that's something that's certainly been, it's balancing the needs to get dollars out the door quickly to landlords and tenants, or homeowners soon, but also recognizing that these are federal funds and that we're stewards of these dollars. We want to make sure that they're actually serving the persons that they're intended to serve and the households that they're intended to benefit. So with that, we have a variety of different systems in place, and it's everything from ensuring that we're paying the landlords directly when possible, so that those dollars are ultimately used for rent or utility companies. We've got those types of arrangements as well. We've got security features built into our online application system to ensure that the applications are truly coming from the area that they're supposed to be coming from. We have information sharing agreements with a number of other states that use the same software and are administering the same programs so that we can share data. And if we start to see a pattern of fraud, then we're able to shut down that application. So we feel confident that we have the safeguards in place, but it's definitely a balance, because the more safeguards you have in place, the slower the actual application processing can go, which can then be to the detriment of the landlords and the tenants we're intending to serve.
I'm glad to hear that those safeguards are in place, because that has been a concern of mine ever since we had these programs, that the landlords may not receive the money. So I'm glad to hear that there might be a direct payment to the landlord, so they are being made whole if there is past due rent.
Yes, sir.
Representative Humphreys.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's just a couple things I want to make sure I understand about the moderate income housing. So we've been funding that at $2 million, right? But now the governor's budget has 20. But from what I understand, just reading your testimony, that it's for towns with a population under 60,000.
That's correct, Representative. So
Okay.
as of now, the statute is limited to rural communities, and we define that using the RHID definition of 60,000 and under.
Okay. And so, but the 20,000 doesn't have that rural community stipulation?
The $20 million.
20 million, I'm sorry.
As the governor's budget would actually run through the traditional allocation for the program, so it would be subject to that limitation on rural communities. However, there is a Senate bill currently that would expand some of MIH dollars, I believe it's 25%, to urban areas as well.
Okay. And so you say that it's available for households who earn between 60% and 150% of gross median income. Is that within that community, or is that statewide? And can you just give me an idea, like how much is that in an annual income?
Absolutely. So we actually defined this particular program, MIH, is using a statewide area median income.
Okay.
And generally that would be probably in the $45,000 or $40,000 to $115,000 range for a household of 4. And it's a scale, so if household of 6 would have a little bit higher of a limit or vice versa.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful. And then my last question has to do with, like, for instance, I represent Andover, it's got less than 60,000 people. Who decides where that money, like someone comes to you and says, okay, I have an idea for a housing unit in Andover, can we get these funds? I mean, who's making that decision on where they're going, and is it rehab or is it new construction? Just a little bit about the process.
Absolutely. So every year we issue a request for proposal in July when we get the funds from the state. We do have a couple of kind of evaluation rankings that we use because we still get $3 to $5 worth of requests for every $1 we have to fund. Those are things like the leverage, the communities leveraging other outside resources, things like readiness to proceed, because we want these developments to happen sooner rather than later, capacity, things like that we use to rank the applications. By statute, the communities have to be, the application has to come from rural communities, so cities or counties. However, we allow those communities, which aren't natural housing developers, to partner with basically anyone, a housing developer, a habitat affiliate, a nonprofit that does housing work. And the community is able to tell us what their needs are. So we funded everything from help gap financing a dairy in Rexford so that they were able to expand their operations. But we've also done infrastructure in a variety of communities around the state. We've done some gap financing for actual multifamily housing. So it would be the city of Andover, for instance, who would come to you answering the RFP saying, we have this idea, or would it be a contractor or, who? So it would actually be the county or the city of whatever area. But of course, they're working with their constituents to determine what that need is. And sometimes they can actually submit multiple requests. However, we do ask them to rank and prioritize those requests, just given the scarcity of the dollars that we have.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Representative Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ryan, for your testimony today. Are you able to provide technical assistance for communities that are trying to build housing in their area and help them leverage the RHID and the MIH and some of those programs?
I appreciate the question, Representative, and that's something that is huge to our mission at Kansas Housing. We think of ourselves as dot connectors because there are so many complexities to the housing market to begin with. And then you have KHRC and Department of Commerce and Federal Home Loan Bank and HUD and USDA Rural Development with pots of money. Sometimes it just takes helping communities and employers and stakeholders understand where the resources are and what the needs are. One of the things that we currently have at the state level is that we work with the Department of Commerce and USDA Rural Development, and we have what we call a housing assessment tool. So our organizations all meet together and we walk communities through a process. And it's a simple organic process that they run the process to identify what their needs are. And of course they can use our statewide housing study now. But then we all meet together so that they don't have to go meet with each individual funder. And we say, well, based on your needs, we offer these resources and Federal Home Loan Bank offers these resources. We also have a network of service providers and developers and contractors and providers out there that we can at least help connect the dots for. And the best part of our housing study is that we have best practices that we've documented. We know that in Norton, they have a really successful homeowner repair program. And we know that the city of Lawrence has a really successful land bank. And we're able to tell those types of stories so that we're able to make those connections. So we're pleased to do that. And obviously, we don't have the capacity in our small office to do it for everyone. But we're trying to make an efficient process. But one of the study's key findings is that we need to expand our network of human capital providers. One idea is to have kind of a county extension officer for housing, whether at a regional level or whatever, because there's a lot of communities that simply don't have the resources or the staff or the ability to get familiar with each one of these programs and resources. So we're pleased to be a part of that solution.
I just want to share with the committee, me and business partners of mine have developed 3 projects with the moderate income housing and the rural housing investment districts. those things don't happen in rural Kansas. Those projects don't happen in rural Kansas without these tools in our toolbox. So often in rural Kansas, a lot of our housing is functionally obsolete. We need new houses that meet the needs of today's consumers. And we just don't have the economies of scale that the urban areas have. When we did our 48-unit moderate income housing project apartment, we had to find contractors sometimes from as far away as Oklahoma City so that we could make the project pencil out. Often our trades have kind of deteriorated over time. It's hard for them to work on the economy of scale that you often have in your urban areas. And then also because of the smaller markets, we don't get the appraisals that you can get in the urban areas. So, I fully support the MIH program, what we do on our HID, which isn't part of this deal. We need it in rural Kansas. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative.
Representative Carlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here. I've worked with your agency on some things, and I find them very responsive. I'm interested in the training for construction workers, and you may have addressed it while I was listening, but you working with community colleges for construction trades. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
I'd be happy to, Representative, and it's all happening on a small scale right now, and the need is large scale. So we recognize that, and we know we're just in this early start of it. But the beauty of things like MIH is we're able to test what's working. So when I mentioned Dodge City's community college for MIH, and when I mentioned the School of Architecture helping to design a couple homes, we've worked with KU's school as well, and it's that type of pilot program that if we can see as successful and then scale up, I think would be a real model. But it's on all of us, including my office, to make sure that we're working with the Board of Education and the Board of Regents and the Community College Association to talk about how to really address this long-term lack of people going into the building trades, because it's a huge barrier to the success of our housing stock. And to be honest, one of the biggest issues that we see is that there's a lot of peaks and a lot of valleys in funding for housing in our state. Weatherization is an example. We've had times where we've ramped up really quick with a lot of federal money, and then we have to lay everyone off immediately. And all of our service providers that do the work around the state quickly think, I'm not going to build up my capacity if we're going to turn around and have to lay off all of our workers. So my bit of, advice or suggestion as we're thinking about housing policy is we would love one-time investment, but what we need is sustainable funding. What we need is some kind of commitment that we're going to be in this game long-term. We're going to be having resources in 3 and 5 and 10 years to address the long-term housing problem. And if we do that, then the developers and contractors that are currently working in Oklahoma City and in Denver and in Omaha suddenly have an incentive to learn about our programs and to work in our state, both now and tomorrow.
If I might just, are you also in need of instructors for those programs? I would guess, like nursing is in need of instructors for nursing. Well, and I have one other question, if I might. We built a homeless shelter 10 years ago in Manhattan. I think the money came through a grant through Housing Resource for 56 beds for people. It's been very successful. Do you do other kinds, you mentioned shelters, but do you do other kinds of housing that might be just intermittent use like that, or is it just shelters, or is there anything else out there?
We truly serve the entire, what we call the continuum of care, and that's recognizing whatever the person's housing needs are. If it's just that literal roof and some supportive services initially, to getting them into some stable housing through emergency rental assistance, some security and utility deposits, but eventually getting them those services and that support that they need to work through maybe Section 8 housing and eventually get into some subsidized housing. And in the perfect world, which I think happens frequently, they would become independent and self-supporting.
Let me stop you right there, because I learned, because of our personal involvement with the shelter, that there are grants, federal, so we may have gotten a federal grant through you for the shelter, I don't know.
That's correct.
But then after people get out of that 2 weeks in the shelter, and if they have a job, they get into some other housing, and is that do you handle any of that? Because those are federal grants as well to put them into the next level of homes.
That's correct. So some cities and counties actually have public housing authorities that may get their own pot of funds, and as well as some of the, like the city of Manhattan. However, for the state of Kansas, we administer most of the federal housing funds through all those different programs that really kind of work through that continuum of care that we talked about.
Well, and we have folks at the shelter that then help decide, who moves into a home and helps find that home, and then and also supervises them in their home to make sure they are doing well. And so that's all under your
It is, but it takes a village, and that's
does.
something that we work closely with DCF and KDADs and local partners, because I think if anything has come from this pandemic, it's that we are interconnected and interdependent as a society. We can't address housing needs without dealing with poverty and without dealing with education, and schools can't get better without healthy homes, and healthcare is so dependent on homes. So it's all interconnected, and we recognize that.
Yeah, you ought to be. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for indulging me, and thank you, Ryan, for your testimony.
Thank you.
Representative Helgerson.
If either you or staff, I can't remember, when this got shifted over, does it go through Department of Commerce for money? Or you're a 501c3?
We are actually a public corporation, so a nonprofit creature of the state that's,
Okay.
however,
Who gives the money to you?
The $2 million in state funds actually flow through the Department of Commerce's EDIF fund to us each year.
Is that the only money they get from the state, other than what's governor's
Yes.
talking about now?
That is the only money we currently get. The rest of our funding is through federal program administration.
Okay, and the governor's recommendation, or at least the discussion has been 20 million of Spark funds or wherever?
State General Fund.
Pardon?
State General Fund.
State, I'm sorry.
State General Fund.
State General Fund. You open to show us a lot more of your books?
Our books are wide open. They actually get wrapped up into the state CAFR, so we're a component unit of the state of Kansas.
Final question I have. You mentioned you had a 6-for-1 for every dollar that you leverage. So for the $2 million, you get $12 million of housing stock. Where does the 6 come from?
The 6 can come from everything from private grant money to employers' dollars.
Can you give me a detail of that sometime?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative.
Representative Buchanan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for your presentation, Ryan. Just to follow up on Representative Francis' discussion about cost of construction and the low appraisals, especially in the rural area, could you explain again the gap financing and the importance of that to the rural area?
Absolutely, Representative. So we've got the gap is what comes up regularly, and that's the cost that it takes to build housing and what the rents can ultimately support. And what we see in rural areas, as the representative mentioned, is that there's less economies of scale, there's appraisal issues, there's the cost of trying to get the goods and the contractors to the rural areas. The same developer can work in Johnson County and build the same housing at significantly less per unit. And it's not that Johnson County doesn't have its own housing issues, but rural communities really have a challenge in that regard. So the gap is what we're ultimately needing to close in order to incentivize developers to develop the housing. Otherwise, there's simply no economic incentive for anyone to go in and do that work, which is why we're seeing that age of the housing and the dilapidation in our housing and the vacancy, particularly in our rural communities.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
All right, I'm not seeing any further questions for Ryan, so thank you for being here and giving us an update on housing in the state of Kansas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
We'll go ahead and move on to the next item, and that's going to be an update from the Kansas Lottery. And so I'd ask the Executive Director, Stephen Durrell, to address the committee. Welcome to committee.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Today, Matt Schwartz is going to be our presenter. I was scheduled to be at another committee, and I just am here because I got done early over there. So Matt is going to present, but I'll be here to answer any questions if once he gets done. So
I did see that you were supposed to be, or you were in Veterans Committee.
I was.
Giving an update as well. So
I was, and at 10:30 I have to be in Senate Penn State. So it's a
you have a busy day.
Fun morning.
All right, Matt.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I do apologize to Representatives Sutton and Burrows. This will be the second time that I've been in front of one of their committees in the last week, so my sincerest apologies for that. You have Mr. Durrell's testimony in front of you. I'm obviously not going to read through it, but I will kind of hit the highlights on those. So on the first page, when it goes through, it talks about traditional lottery sales, and at the very beginning talks about fiscal 21, which was a very good year for us. It was actually our highest year of sales ever, buoyed both by national large jackpots and enthusiasm and sales from that, and from continuing growth in our instant scratch game products and portfolio. So definitely good news to report there. The second to last paragraph on that page talks about the first part here of fiscal 22, the first half of the year. Also continuation of another very good year. Probably the most important thing that I'll tell the committee today is that we're on pace to meet all of the projections, revenue transfers wise, from the CRE estimates and that have been included in everything there. So good year so far to date and on pace. And I do like to point out some of the hidden benefits that in addition to the transfers. So the very last sentence on that first page talks about in addition to paying out over $200 million in prizes over the course of fiscal 21, we also paid out, our retailers also earned more than $19 million in commissions for sales of our products across the state. One of the ways on page 2 that we've been able to help increase the growth in sales, and members of this committee are very familiar with, are the vending machines that we were able to put in place and start implementing in fiscal year 2020. To date, we've got more than 225 of the original 270 machines in place. The ones that are still working to be placed are primarily the what we refer to as the EX machines. They're the ones primarily designed for social environments. Obviously, some of those retailers have been hardest hit by some of the COVID issues over the last couple of years, and that's led to kind of some of the delays in getting those placed and in place. But certainly the machines that you're probably most familiar with seeing in the grocery stores, convenience stores, Walmart locations, those types of things, the machines that sell both the draw games and it dispense the instant tickets as well. Virtually all of those are in place and in use. With fiscal year 21 appropriation, we did purchase another additional 70 machines. Supply chain problems are real. And those have just recently arrived, and we're working to get those in place here in the coming months as well. And our fiscal 22 budget includes what will probably be the final planned purchase of another 70 machines with fiscal 22 appropriations. The beginning target for that program was always somewhere in the 400-ish range of machines, and as we evaluate, that's still looking like the right place to be. So the machines that just arrived, and then one more planned purchase in the fiscal year 22 budget is probably where we see that going, barring significant changes in the future. The bottom half of page 2 talks about the transfers and where those funds go. Obviously, the first $50 million of that is by formula to economic development, juvenile detention facilities, correctional institutions, building fund, and a small sliver there for problem gambling and addictions grant fund. The biggest part of the funding from the lottery that goes to the PGAGF goes from the expanded lottery, the casino side, and we'll see that a little bit later on that. And then, as Steve mentioned, he just got from the Veterans Affairs Committee, so what they were most interested is the 1.26 million that goes to the veterans each year, and then the last paragraph on that page, another one of those hidden benefits, the state income taxes that we collect on behalf of our winners, set-off collections that we do directly through the lottery, and recently instituted set-off collections that also get done now through the 4 state-operated casinos. Page 3 talks about some of the marketing and partnerships and other ways that we've worked to help drive sales and engage with our players, and goes through there. The Play On app in the digital space has been growing, and one of the things that's been one of the more recent innovations with that is the ticket checker, and the number of tickets that our players are actually able to check through there. A few of the games have a little bit of complicated gameplay. It's always nice to be able to check just to make sure that you know whether you won or didn't before you discard a non-winning ticket. The bottom there talks about, we talked a little bit about fiscal year 22 to date being another good year and on pace to meet all the transfer projections from the fall CRE. And the bottom there talks about some of the cumulative figures over the now 34 years of the lottery. So to really kind of sum up the game plan, nothing in here is real surprising, right? Create tickets and prizes that appeal to our players, focus on the distribution of those tickets and get them available to our players, make them visible at our retailers, both through what they see on the counter, through our point of sale, and through the vending machines. Engage digitally and make the ability through those and awareness through our marketing and sponsorship programs, and do what we do. None of that game plan is terribly surprising. We stick to the basics, and we've been doing a good job of it. Switching on to page 4 talks about the other avenue of lottery revenues as the expanded gaming through the casinos. I do want to make sure to note, as with what we've done in traditional lottery, what all of us have done over the last few years, it's been a very concerted effort to mix economic interests and safety interests. And we really do appreciate the hard work that all of our casino facility managers have done to help incorporate that balance, to help obviously do the business of what we're in business to do, but also work to keep their staff safe, to work to keep their patrons, our players safe, and those. So they've been engaged with us throughout this whole process, and with local governments as well, to meet all the health and safety regulations and guidelines that are in place, and we do appreciate the hard work that they've done to help do that. So in fiscal year 19 was kind of the peak of casino revenue. It reached a 411 million, I believe, in total revenue across those 4 casinos in total. Obviously, fiscal year 20 was when COVID hit and those casinos were shut down for close to 2 months in late fiscal year 20. In fiscal year 21, we see the rebound there in that chart. The one where you see the Hollywood casino in the Kansas City area was the slowest of those to recover back into that. Of course, that Kansas City market had some of the tightest restrictions for some of the longest time based on some of those local things. So that was the primary driver of why that one was a little bit slower to recover there in fiscal year 21. And then in fiscal year 22, what we've been seeing is that we're on once again on pace with the CRE projections from this fall to be beginning to approach and probably get back to roughly 95% of where we were, pre-COVID in terms of revenues there, and those projections. Top of page 5 just kind of talks about the fund transfers on that expanded lottery casino side, both for fiscal year 21 and cumulatively, and that's where really the large share of what the lottery and the expanded lottery revenues that goes to support those problem gaming programs is in there within that. Pages 4 and 5, or pages 5 and most of page 6 have more detail about some of the individual casino facilities. And then the very last blurb at the bottom of page 6, we always include this last note, but the lottery has received no significant inquiries regarding any operations at racetrack gaming facilities in fiscal year 21. So I know I kind of sped through that, but certainly willing to stand for any questions anyone might have. And to make it up for Representative Sutton having to hear me twice in a week, if any of you, I know he is scheduled to report out our budget. So if you had any really doozies of budget questions that you were going to direct to him, if while I'm here, I might be able to help ease his burden on that a little bit as well, if that pleases the chair. So that's my presentation. I'll stand for questions.
All right, thank you for being here. And actually, some of these questions might be directed to Chairman Sutton when he's reporting your budget out momentarily. If I recall, when I was the chairman of the General Government Budget Committee, the percentage in the law that was passed or went into effect in 1987, is that 33%?
The percentage in statute was 30%.
30%.
And then I believe the last 10, 12, 15 years, that's been replaced with proviso language each year for essentially what has been earned. One of the things industry-wise that we've seen, it hasn't been us, we can see it in other states as well, is that as more of the a lot of our instant ticket growth, for example, has been in that $10, $20, and $30 price range that have been added. Those have higher payouts on some of those games. And so some of that expectation that as that's grown, the leftover revenue percentage has shrunk a little bit, and that's an industry-wide thing from the original 30% benchmark that was, from 87, 88 back in those times.
All right, thank you. And how many vending machines do we have since we passed that?
The original purchase was 270. We received another 70, as I said, that are just not even quite ready to go out. They literally just arrived. And about 225 are in place. So those roughly 40 that aren't are those EX, the draw ticket only machines that are really targeted for those social environment, bars, restaurants, those types of things, retailers. That portion has just kind of with COVID has been pushed back a little bit.
All right, thank you. And the final question I have, and this is going to sound redundant because I always say this every year, but when looking at the casinos, you're looking at basically a flat or a stagnant percentage change for Hollywood. And you had mentioned that due to COVID-19 that the Kansas City metropolitan area had more restrictive precautions in place, and that's possibly one of the reasons why Hollywood did not see a stark increase as the other 3 casinos across the state. But I want to also comment, have there been any projections that if an actual hotel was built next to the casino, that we would have increased projections at Hollywood Casino?
I have not seen such a study. I was turning to see if he was going to stand up, because I will certainly defer on answering this.
Stephen?
Mr. Chair, there have been studies over the years that have shown any number of different things. I think that right now, it's my understanding that there's a brand new development at what formerly was the Schilderbahn site that includes a very large hotel. So I'm not sure where the conversations about hotel building are at this moment. I know that they continue to talk about it. They continue to talk about it with unified government. But I haven't seen a study lately is the short answer to that.
All right, thank you, Stephen. Well, I mean, the committee knows that I've mentioned this many times over the years that I think when the legislation was passed back in 2007, a destination casino would consider a casino, event center, hotel. And Hollywood is the only one that does not have a hotel, and I think their sales would increase considerably if they would have a hotel on the premises.
Certainly, you are not the only legislator to voice that opinion. So,
all right, committee, are there any questions in regards to lottery? Representative Wolfmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm looking at this chart that you have, and on 21 to 22, they all got healthy percent increases. But the Kansas Star only had 0.24. Can you explain maybe?
I believe the most likely contributor to that is the facility that went in the Park City area, right in the middle of that. That would be the most reasonable explanation for some of that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Ballard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will comment. I will agree. I've had constituents ask me repeatedly why we don't have a hotel at this casino. But my question is, I'd like to know, on your page 2, it says Department Administration Debt Set-Off Program. Would you tell me what that is, please?
Sure. Set-off program is administered by the Department of Administration to collect any number of past due or things due to state or local governments. It can include court issues, old utility bills, often is thank you. Often is associated with child support, those types of things, but any number of things. Obviously, as a state agency, any payments that we make, we've long been subject to, before we make players, we match against the set-off program, and if there's any debts due. Legislation passed in recent years and work between the set-off program and the casino facility managers to get it implemented. Recently started for large prizes that are won at those 4 state-operated casinos to also be subject to those provisions and started being able to collect for those.
Thank you. I was guessing. I wasn't sure. My other thing is, when someone wins and they can get it, all the money over so many years, or they settle and they take so much, what do we do with the rest of that money that they actually won when they take the lump sum?
Okay, so certain games do offer the ability for or the prize as an annuity payment over a number of years, or a cash option, and essentially that cash option is the cost of the time value of money, cost of what it would cost today to purchase a annuity through a financial servicer or whatever that is over that course of time. So they're effectively the same amount of money. One is just getting the lump sum now and you can invest it and grow it over time, or one is we place that investment with a insurer, financial institution, whatever it is, and they grow and guarantee those payments over time. But effectively, time value of money, they're the same. It's just the choice of whether you want that money now, grow it yourself, or whether you want those guaranteed payments over that period of time and wait the 20 years to receive all of it.
I got it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Helgerson.
Do you have the 4 contract date renewals for the casinos yet?
Steve, do you want to, the casino renewals, off the top of my head,
Not off the top of my head. I believe that information has been sent. Didn't we send that already?
I'm not sure. I guess what the first was the Boot Hill. That has been extended. The Kansas Crossing has been extended, and we have not received any extension inquiries from the Kansas City, Hollywood, or Kansas Star in Mulvane. I believe those initial contract periods are set through 26 or 27.
Could you make sure you send those to me? And the reason I'm mentioning this at this point is the governor's office told me 2 years ago that they renegotiated the contract without the legislative involvement. So that's why I'd like to know specifically in a formal document when the contracts were issued and whether or not any of them have been renewed without the legislature's input.
I will, sure.
Stephen?
I can answer that. Representative Helgerson, the way that the Expanded Lottery Act is written, if there is a contract extension, it is based on, it doesn't call for legislative involvement. If there was certainly provisions in the law for that, obviously then the state would have obviously come back and said, here are things that we need to address. But right now there is no legislative requirement.
Representative Helgerson.
The reason this irritates me is because we got into this discussion when we had a lengthy discussion in here 4 or 5 years ago, and we found out that the contracts were coming up sometime in the 2000. And I said, well, the legislature should be involved in those renewal of contracts because we did the legislation. And I was told a couple of years ago, the governor, I introduced legislation. I first of all introduced a proviso that said the legislature should be involved in this discussion. It got taken out in conference committee. I introduced a statutory change, and then the governor's office, this governor's office, goes ahead and renegotiates the contract without us being involved. Am I a little concerned about this kind of discussion? Yes. And all I think is that the legislature, if the legislature is going to consciously give it over to the executive branch, then that's a point that we should have that discussion. If it's going to be kept with the legislature, and when I read the statute, I think that there's a legitimate thing that the legislature should be involved, I think that's a point of discussion. So please provide those dates.
Happy to do so, sir.
All right, any further questions? And we'll be having more discussion when Chairman Sutton goes through the Kansas Lottery budget later on this morning. All right, seeing none, thank you, Stephen, for being here, and thank you for the update for the Kansas Lottery. So I'll now turn it over to Chairman Sutton from the General Government Budget Committee to go through the budgets, and please indicate which budget you're going to be starting with. Chairman Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, let's just keep a good thing going. We'll start with the Kansas Lottery. We've got 5 minutes and 4 budgets. I think that'll be just fine. All right.
I have faith in you.
Starting in 2022, the agency requests a revised estimate of $375.3 million from special revenue funds. This is entirely a fee-funded agency. There's a decrease of $812,000 below the 22 approved amount based on lottery intake. The agency revised estimate also includes 90 FTEs, which is unchanged. The agency estimates a decrease in expanded lottery revenue from the 4 state-owned casinos of $912,000 thanks COVID. Now, this decrease is primarily attributable to a decrease in the gaming facility manager fee expenditures, which are proportional to total sales and paid to casino operators. The estimate for this expenditure was lowered from the original estimate due to unknown conditions related to the COVID-19 pandemic at the state-owned casinos. This estimate will be reevaluated during subsequent consensus revenue estimates. The remaining adjustments include an increase of basically $100,000, which is primarily attributable to an increase in ticket printing and shipping costs based on increased ticket sales in 2022. If you sell more tickets, you got to print more tickets. It costs more money than expected. The governor concurred with the agency's revised estimate, and so did we. I'll stand for questions or run to 23.
Move on to 23.
All right. In 23, the agency requests $376.4 million, all from special revenue funds. This is an increase of $1.1 million above the 22 revised estimate. The agency estimates $38 million in lottery prizes paid by the state, which is an increase of $1 million. Went to the chairman. The agency requests additional increases of $104,728, all from special revenue funds. These adjustments primarily comprise increases in salaries and wages, expenditures for that, contractuals and contractual services. However, these increases are partially offset by a decrease of $1.2 million for capital outlay expenditures due to the purchase of the lottery vending machines that does not recur for 23. The agency request also includes 93 FTEs, which is an increase of 3 FTE positions above the 22 revised estimate. The governor recommends expenditures of $376.2 million, all from special revenue funds. This is a decrease of $200,000. Decrease is due to the governor directing the agency to use existing resources to fill the vacant FTE positions rather than additional expenditures. The governor's recommendation includes 90 FTE positions, which is a decrease of 3 FTE positions. The Budget Committee concurs with the governor's recommendation. I would note that With regards to the 3 FTEs, we did have some discussion on that. The lottery is one of those animals, kind of like you'll find in Department of Revenue, whereas the more people that you add, the more revenue that you generate in general. So I didn't have a real problem with adding the 3 FTEs, but when we discussed it with the agency, they said that they had some unfilled positions that they could go ahead and absorb those, that need within their existing FTE allotment. So they were just fine with the governor not recommending the 3 FTEs, and so we concurred with that. I'll stand for questions.
Committee, are there questions for Chairman Sutton? Seeing none, Chairman Sutton.
I would move the Budget Committee report for the Kansas Lottery for 2022 and 2023.
All right, you've heard the motion and a second by Representative Burrows. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Chairman Sutton.
All right, well, let's just keep it going with the gambling, and we'll go with the Kansas Racing and Gaming Commission next. A significantly smaller budget. This agency also is fee funded. For 2022, the agency requests $9 million from special revenue funds in 22. This is a decrease of $3,500 below the 22 approved amount. This decrease is due to a decrease of $6,000 in salaries and wages, which is partially offset by an increase of $2,500 in contractual service expenditures. The agency's revised estimate includes 99.5 FTEs, which is unchanged from the 22 approved number. Again, any changes in this are strictly due to changes in the gambling habits in the various locations. The governor concurred with the agency's revised estimate, and so did we. I'll stand for questions.
Move on to 2023.
All right, very good. For 2023, this is going to sound remarkably similar. The agency requests $9 million, all from special revenue funds. This is an increase of $12,000 above the 22 revised estimate. The increase is primarily attributable to increased expenditures for employee contributions for fringe benefits such as group health. The agency requests also 99.5 FTE positions, which is unchanged from the 22 revised estimate. The governor concurred, and so did we. Stand for questions.
Any questions for Chairman Sutton in regards to the Kansas Racing and Gaming Commission's budgets? Seeing none, Chairman Sutton.
I would move the committee recommendations for the Kansas Racing and Gaming Commission years 2022 and 2023.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion, seconded by Representative Burrows. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Chairman Sutton.
All right, normally I would go with governmental ethics, but the analyst Lemunion is going to be slumming over in the Senate here pretty quick, so I'll go ahead and get the Board of Hearing Aid Examiners out of the way.
That's fine.
For 2022, the agency estimates revised expenditures of $34,000, all from the Hearing Aid Board Fee Fund. Revised estimate is an increase of almost $2,000 above the 22 approved amount. In fiscal year 2022, the agency changed executive directors. The increase is primarily due to the new executive director's rate of pay being higher than the previous executive director's rate of pay by $2,000. The agency requests no FTE positions, which is the same as the approved number. The governor concurs with the agency's revised estimate, and the Budget Committee similarly concurred, but also wants to call attention to the license fees, as if you look at the fee fund, and I don't have it pulled up right in front of me yet, but if you look at the fee fund, you'll see that it is growing at a pretty remarkable level, and it seems like the expenditures are somewhere around 1/3, about 1/3 of the fee fund balance for a year. So we've got 3 years of funding built into that fee fund. The agency is aware of our concerns on that, and will be reviewing their licensing fees. Thank you. I thought you'd already taken off. All right, I'll stand for questions on 22 or keep going.
Just keep moving on to 2023.
Very good. For 2023, the agency estimates revised expenditures of $34,000, all from the Hearing Aid Board Fee Fund. The revised estimate is an increase of $1,600 above the fiscal year 23 approved amount. Again, this is due to the fact that the new executive director makes more than the old executive director. The old executive director couldn't be reached for comment on that. The governor concurs with the agency's revised estimates, and so did we. I'll stand for questions.
All right, committee, are there any questions in regards to the Kansas Board of Hearing Aid examiners? Seeing none, Chairman Sutton.
This was a pretty contentious one. I'm surprised that there were no questions. I think that's the case.
Just a
My
minute.
my melodic voice put them to sleep. I will move the House Budget Committee recommendation for the Board of Hearing Aid Examiners years 2022 and 2023.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion, second by Representative Burrows. All those in favor say aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Chairman Sutton.
All right, I've run over time, but we're doing pretty good here. Let's go on with the Governmental Ethics Commission. The agency requests a revised estimate of $724,000, including $470,000 SGF, and this is one of my very few agencies funded with SGF, so, you know, kind of excited. I know, it's exciting. This is the same all funds amount as approved by the 2021 legislature and includes an SGF increase of $19,485. The SGF increase is due to the agency's supplemental request to restore $21,000 of SGF that was allotted by the governor in the June 2020 allotment. The allotted funds were to be used to fund the conversion of a part-time attorney to a full-time position as approved by the 2020 legislature. The agency's been using the Governmental Ethics Commission fee fund to fund the position. So this rightfully is an SGF spend that we approved. The governor concurs with the agency's revised estimate for 22, and so did we. And I'll stand for questions before, or move on.
Just move on to 2023.
Okay. Okay, for 2023, the agency requests $809,000, including $545,000 SGF for 23. This is an all funds increase of $85,000 above the 23 approved amount. Significant items in the agency request include the following. Restoration of the governor's June 2020 allotment. The agency requests $20,756 as we approved in 2020. And they have an enhancement salary pay plan. The agency requests $79,566, including $73,000 SGF, to provide pay increases after a salary study was conducted by a subcommittee of the commission. Okay, let that sink in a moment. Reduction in printing expenditures related to electronic document distribution and in-house printing saved $4,000. A reduction in data entry $3,000, reduction in budgeted mileage $2,700, reduction in postage $2,500, thanks electronics, and reduction in court reporter expenditures $1,000. The governor recommends $777,906, including $520 SGF. This includes a partial adoption of the salary pay plan enhancement request totaling $48,000, all SGF. The Budget Committee concurs with the governor's recommendation with the following adjustment, deleting the agency's salary pay plan enhancement request. This was one of the very few times that we didn't have a unanimous decision in our committee, so we were torn on this one. But with the 5% increase, global increase still on the table, we didn't feel comfortable getting involved in a pay increase for one particular agency while that is still being discussed. I would note that our deletion of that is not meaning to communicate that those pay increases aren't warranted. I think the salary study was pretty indicative of that, but I just don't want both of them running at the same time, the 5% and individual agency increases. So it was the committee decision to not recommend those pay increases, but to keep that in mind for down the road, whether this 5% passes or not.
Well, and I would contend that we need to address the pay increase that was suggested in the governor's budget, but also have that be a global issue.
Right.
As you had indicated when you had the discussion in your committee, and that's something that we'll discuss when we have the entire budget. So we're actually addressing all state employees and not just individual budgets like we have done in the past.
Exactly. That was kind of my thought process as well.
Representative Wolfmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for talking about the deletion of the 48,000. I would register my concern about that. I know that is a dire situation at governmental ethics, and I think that if we don't do something significant, we're going to have significant troubles even staffing that agency, and they perform such an important, do such important work for us. So when you say down the road, maybe possibly this isn't off the table completely.
Not in my mind at all. I
Good.
mean, we still have omnibus. We have a lot of stuff that to walk through here. I absolutely wouldn't take this off the table.
Good.
I would just say for our budget recommendation right now, I would remove it from this particular report out.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'd like to continue to advocate for this at some point.
And
Thank you.
You'll probably, depending upon how crazy you get with the numbers, you might have my support on that too.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Burrows.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I was the non-unanimous vote because I truly believe that
There were two.
Oh, there was two, sorry.
There were two,
There, this agency does a tremendous amount of guidance for many of us legislators, and it's kept probably a number of us out of trouble over the years. And if you don't believe that, get in trouble with them and you will see. And I would just state that the guidance that we get from them, it takes knowledge and experience in which to work through those campaign finance reports and to keep us in line. And we're talking a very minimal amount of money. We're talking to people who are making $15 an hour guiding us. I mean, I believe that the pay raise that was recommended by the governor is justified. It's long overdue. And we can have that global 5%. I mean, we can always state later that we may not want to include, they've just got a raise through the recommendation of the governor. Do they deserve the 5% after that? I think that's a discussion we can have on the global aspect. But I really truly believe that the governor's recommendation after the pay study that's gone in, there's been a lot of resources put into that we would be justified in allowing the pay raises to move forward by the governor's rec, and then have the discussion about the 5% with this particular agency. I don't want to see us lose qualified people in an agency that many of us utilize quite a bit. So, Mr. Chairman, I could make a motion to put the money back in at this particular time because I'm afraid it might get lost through omnibus. And I would suggest that maybe we look at the 5% different than what we have globally with this particular agency. So I'll make a motion, Mr. Chairman, that we do the governor's rec on this particular item and consider the 5% global universally as we have in the past. But I'd like to see this money put back in with the governor's recommendation.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. Is there a second? Seconded by Representative Woodard. Discussion on the motion? Just for clarification, this is putting in the governor's recommendation of $48,000 for pay increases, but having the 5% that was suggested in our budget as a global issue.
That's correct. Okay. After that global issue, Mr. Chairman, just for clarification, would be part of the consideration if we even wanted to add that on later. That would be up to the committee. But this was a recommendation from the governor after the pay study.
Well, and I just kind of want to make a comment in regards to the 5%. I know it's kind of off topic of the motion that Representative Burrows has made. And for 2 years, we haven't done any pay increases for our employees because we didn't know exactly where the state budget was going to be in regards to the pandemic. We are finding ourselves in an economic environment where we are going to be trying to find individuals to work for the state of Kansas. And one of the reasons why some may leave the state as an employer is because of pay. And we need to seriously adjust that. And we need to be competitive. As you had mentioned, if we want to keep our qualified employees with the state of Kansas, we are going to have to be a qualified or a competitive employer as well, because if we're not, then most likely they will leave. I mean, it's a competitive market, and I think as a state, even though we're a public entity, we need to act like a business. And if a business is losing employees because of pay, then there's adjustments that need to be made. And so that's why I do not have a problem with the discussion of the 5% pay increase that the governor has suggested in her budget, because we do need to act like a business, and we need to keep our employees. But that's a discussion that we'll have when we actually have the budget. And this is kind of aside from the motion that was made by Representative Burrows, but I just kind of wanted to make that comment. Representative Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And one of the things I do struggle with, as you know, in some of my budgets, in a sense, we've been backdoored, and they've went ahead and got their raises in other ways because we haven't addressed that. And I always struggle with the ones that go through the process, sometimes pay the price of going through the process, and then other people find another way around. I agree with your comments very much that we've got to address this as we move forward. I don't think a 5% across the board increase addresses the root of the problem. So I guess I just wanted to point that out. We will need to exclude certain agencies, I think, as we look at the 5% global, because they basically already got their increases. Thank you.
Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want the committee to remember the chairman's words when you start to see my budgets as they come through. So, thank you.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Representative Burrows, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There is a need here. We're talking 6 employees that have a tremendous amount of responsibility in assisting us and guiding us through this, and it was a divided vote on the committee, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank my committee chairman for allowing me the opportunity to express my opinion in reference to this, but I'll move my motion.
Your chair was
All right,
outside.
committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
The ayes appear to have it.
Vision?
All right, division has been called. All those in favor, raise your right hand. Counting 6.
I'm a
Opposed,
yes,
same
Mr.
sign.
Chairman. This is John Alcala.
Oh, John Alcala.
I got it.
7.
All right, on a vote from 10 not in favor and 7, including the representative on WebEx, in favor, motion fails. We're back on the budget.
All right. With that, I will move the committee recommendations for the Governmental Ethics Committee, Governmental Ethics Commission for 2022 and 2023.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes appear to have it. Ayes do have it. Motion passes. All right, committee, that actually clears up everything that we had for today. If you'll notice, for tomorrow, we are probably going to have a pretty lengthy bill hearing in regards to House Bill 2541, which that is the diversion of the docket fees from the judicial branch to the State General Fund, and then allocation from the State General Fund to the judicial branch, which is something that was requested when the Chief Justice gave her State of the Justice speech in the House chamber. So until tomorrow morning, we are adjourned until 9 a.m.